And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about... Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another tremendous installment from very, very high above all the vacuous and perfidious forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. Is there a possibility, my friends? Do you think that it's at all possible that we could have conservatives running California? Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but it certainly looks pretty good after last night's so-called election results. The reason I put them in quotation marks is, well, we don't really have any results yet because they're not done counting the ballots. Apparently, I mean, as we all know, in California, it could take days, it could take weeks. In some cases, it could take multiple weeks to count all of the ballots. You know, it wasn't that long ago that we would have, election results the night of the election. Now, granted, it might be 3 o'clock in the morning, but at the very least, we would know who won the election on Election Day. That all ended with COVID. You see, the world changed with COVID, and all of the things that worked before somehow don't work anymore. And so now California takes forever to count the ballots. The race that I'm most curious about is Los Angeles. Not because it has, an outsized influence on the state, but it is one of America's largest cities. It is the one city, I think, maybe outside of New York, that you would say, yep, a liberal is going to run that. And that may still very well happen. But Spencer Pratt, the guy we've been talking about, he ended up number 2, or he's number 2 right now. And he and Karen Bass, the horrible, awful Karen Bass, are pretty well tied. And in California, the top 2 people in the primary, regardless of party, advance to the general election. And the third candidate in the mayor's race, she's a distant third, so I don't even think that we need to even worry about her. But think about this. Spencer Pratt, and he's not, I doubt very seriously that Spencer Pratt, if you boiled all of his views down to rock bottom, I doubt very seriously you would conclude that he's a conservative. However, he is a common sense guy. And many of the things, most of the things that are just pure common sense end up being conservative. Because the other side, they're so far on their left wing, out on their left wing that, none of the stuff that I shouldn't say none. I'm sure there's a policy here or there that I'm not thinking of, but the vast majority of their policies lack any sort of common sense whatsoever. Simple things like, maybe we should prepare for a wildfire. It is California. We kind of have been in a drought, and we haven't been taking care of any sort of power line right-of-ways or really, doing any logging whatsoever. And so wildfires, definite possibility, and you might want to prepare for those. And, from what he said, this is the thing that prompted Spencer Pratt to run because his house burned down. And, maybe it was preventable, maybe it wasn't. But the truth is that Los Angeles didn't have, I mean, they were not prepared for a fire. I mean, as if you can be, completely prepared. But, here in Wyoming, many towns have a volunteer fire department. And, I mean, okay, so smaller towns, whatever. But our fire response is pretty good. I mean, considering that it's all volunteer, and, I mean, very few towns actually have a fire department that, stays at the fire station and they're ready to go. Sheridan happens to be one of those places that does have a full-time fire, outfit. But not in California, apparently. Not in one of America's largest cities. No, we cannot be prepared for a wildfire. And so, with the Palisades fire, man, that thing burned, I don't know how many homes, but it was a tremendous amount. So I mean, Spencer Pratt, doing pretty well, and looks like he's going to go to the general election. Also, Steve Hilton, former Fox News commentator, immigrant. He's British. Apparently, he's going to go to the general election, too. He finished, I think he finished number 2. But the interesting thing, I was up late last night watching election returns. But in many counties that you wouldn't expect, Steve Hilton was actually, leading the race. So that's tremendous. Now, the question is it possible for a conservative to be the governor of California? Well, it's been a really long time. I mean, maybe the last real conservative was Ronald Reagan. But there have been a few in between that figured out how to be the governor of California and be kind of conservative and still remain in office. And that is, get reelected. One of those was Jerry Moonbeam Brown. And, I mean, he never quite recovered from getting the nickname Moonbeam. But what did he do? He started out as a radical liberal. I mean, that's where he got the nickname Moonbeam. But he realized that there were some things that he could do, some liberal ideas that he could implement, and others that just wouldn't work and that would result in him getting unelected. And so what he did is very much the same thing that your typical, or I shouldn't say typical because I don't know if that exists anymore, but your classic Democrats would do. That they would push the envelope, policies that, they wanted to get through, but they'd only push it so far as it would resonate with the public. And some of those, arguably didn't resonate, and so they'd back off. And, a good example of that, though I hate to admit it, is Barney Frank. Barney Frank I think he was in Congress for 22 years. Radical liberal, the only guy that got caught in a male prostitution scandal and still got reelected. But the question is, how did he get reelected so much? Did he push radical, crazy policies like men and women's sports? No. But he did push the envelope on gay marriage, and, he was one of the people that got, civil unions. It's not marriage. Words mean things. But my point is that your classic liberal, that is your run-of-the-mill Democrat, I would say all the way up until, I don't know, maybe it was like 2016 where they really started going off the rails with Trump. But up until that point, you could be a Democrat and still halfway make sense. And, that's kind of been the history of California. Look at Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, so he's a Republican. I think he ran as an independent for when he was governor of California. But anyway, way more conservative than Gavin Newsom. So how did he do it? Well, I mean, there are certain things that you have to do that are conservative, that do make sense, and that work out well for your political career, even if you're a radical Democrat. But the problem with the modern Democrat Party is they have lost the ability to only go so far as the public will accept. Instead, they've shifted to pushing policies that they've probably truly always wanted. I mean, if they had a wish list of all the things that they wanted to do, they'd go ahead and they're pushing them. And if you disagree, well, instead of backing off a little bit and saying, well, maybe we'll, maybe we'll back off that one a little bit and we'll take it a piece at a time. Instead of doing that, now it's if you disagree with them, you're a horrible, horrible person. And that's the part, I think, that isn't resonating with even the Democrat base. And so the question is, are Californians tired of the radical Democrat policies? And I would say last night was a pretty good indication that they are. I mean, when you end up second as mayor of Los Angeles, and it's not by very many. I just saw here on the TV in the studio, they just flashed the mayoral results, or the count. It's not results yet because they're not done, but they just flashed the count, and both Karen Bass and Spencer Pratt were right around 30%. So it's not that. I mean, he's not running away with it, but there again, neither is the Democrat. And in previous elections, that's exactly what you would see, is that the Democrat would run away with it. I mean, because it's California, right? And it's the land of fruits and nuts. And, you just think that if you're a conservative, it's really hard to get elected there. But the truth is there are conservative places in the state, like Orange County. Orange County has a significant number of Republicans in it. It's very atypical compared to the rest of California. So there are pockets of the Golden State that are conservative. And I think if you look overall at like last night's results of the governor's race, there's a significant, and again, I didn't say majority, I said a significant population of voters in California that are just sick of Democrat policies. Because, I mean, that's the end result of Democrat thinking, is a crappy result, and many people losing elections. And eventually, I mean, there are places like Illinois. Of course, Illinois, they probably rig elections all the way back to Kennedy. But I think it would be a shocker, if a Republican were to win. Definitely the mayor of Chicago, or the governor of Illinois. We got J.B. Pritzker to worry about now. But anyway, I mean, there are some bright spots in last night's election results, and I think the big ones is the governor's race, definitely, and the mayor of Los Angeles. But there were others. There were several Republicans that did very well in last night's election. Let's see here. Let's kind of round this out. There's a piece from Fox News. Incumbent L.A. mayor survives heated criticisms from both parties, advances to election runoff. And, of course, referring to awful Karen Bass. And I quote, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass is advancing to a runoff election, which, by the way, that's something that we need to do in Wyoming, is have a runoff election. Anyway, she's advancing to the runoff election after failing to capture 51% of the vote needed to win outright in a bid for re-election that has drawn national attention. Bass has come under fierce political scrutiny from both the left and the right as she tries to secure a second term as L.A. mayor. From the right, Bass has received criticism from challenger Spencer Pratt from failing to hold government accountable in areas like emergency response and addressing the homeless population. By the way, I didn't prepare this for the program today, but there's a great interview that Spencer Pratt did with Bill Maher, in which they talked at length about naked drug addicts. And Spencer Pratt says that once he brought that up, that his phone has been blowing up with people sending him pictures of naked drug addicts from all over Los Angeles. Maybe I'll prep that for tomorrow, because it's actually pretty funny. From the left, fellow Democratic candidate Nitya Raman has slammed Bass for not doing enough to promote affordability. Let's see here. Pratt is second in early returns of the vote, while Raman is further back, like way back, doesn't even have a chance, unless they rig an election somewhere. Bass, for her own part, maintains that her 3 years as mayor have taken the city in the right direction. Now, that's not entirely true. Quote, Los Angeles is at a turning point after decades of rising homelessness, underbuilt housing, and a shrinking police force. It's Mayor Karen Bass who finally stepped up to change how the city works, Bass's website reads. Homelessness is down, and more housing is being built, and the LAPD is hiring new officers. In what world? I mean, everybody knows when you can tell that a politician is lying. Their lips are moving. Bass won election to office in 2022 in a 54.8 to 45.2 victory over independent challenger Rick Caruso. So November is shaping up to be pretty interesting in California, as it is in a lot of different places in the state. Now, here, Well, we've got 10 candidates running for the House of Representatives, 3 for the governor's race, which I'm not the governor's race. I'm just pleased that there aren't 9 or 7 or whatever that number was a few election cycles back. But there's 3. You got a liberal, and then you've got Megan Felder, who I would say is kind of in the middle, I suppose. And then on the right, you have Brent Behan. And so, I think it's going to be a great election, and I can't wait to watch it. So let's see here. Where do I want to start? Let's see here. Let's do this. So the city of Rock Springs, and you've probably seen this. I was going to cover this yesterday on the show, and I got sidetracked with Josh Durrell and the government's, the Department of Socialism. But the city of Rock Springs has, for a long time, tried to advance the LGBTQ ZXPWDS agenda. Remember, it was a couple of years ago, I think back in 2023 maybe, that I did that investigation into what was happening in Rock Springs. That's where we found out that Clark Stith had donated to a drag queen fundraiser. He claims it was for a baseball team, but really, now the judge, Drag Show Clark, he was donating to a drag queen event. But if you remember, and this video is still on my YouTube page, you'll have to go way back to find it. But I sent an undercover journalist into a drag show in Rock Springs. And these events are attended by elected officials. And it turns out to be a big deal in Rock Springs. But the more shocking thing in that video is that we captured a 10-year-old boy dressed up as a girl, and the crowd was treating him as if he were a stripper. It's a pretty shocking video. You'll never think of the song "Working 9 to 5" the same way ever again. But that was back in 2023. The guy that was running all those drag shows was an employee of the city. I don't know that he is currently, but at the time of that investigation, he absolutely was a government employee. Also, they've got the theater downtown. The Broadway Theater in Rock Springs is owned by the city of Rock Springs, and they consistently hold LGBTQZXPWDS events there. Well, now the mayor of Rock Springs has issued a proclamation, a Pride Month proclamation. I don't know what government has to do with who you decide to go to bed with. That's not government's place at all to be in the middle of somebody's sexual activity. And frankly, I find it to be pretty revolting that we would even suggest that government needs to proclaim an entire month to celebrate what you do behind closed doors. Frankly, I don't care what people do behind closed doors. I'll probably remind you that it's a sin. I'll probably remind you that it's definitely not marriage. But government doesn't have any place there, and I don't want to hear about it, and I'm pretty sure nobody else does. The people that celebrate Pride Month do. But the Rock Springs mayor issued a proclamation proclaiming all of June Pride Month. Here's a piece from the Cow Pie. This is going to be a pretty Cow Pie heavy episode, by the way. In a little while, we're going to talk about Chuck Gray versus the Cow Pie, and it is a tremendous video. It's going to take up a pretty good chunk of time. Oh, and by the way, I went ahead and opened up the phone lines this morning. I know I'm bouncing all over the place. But I did open up the phone lines. And so if you want to be part of the program, the phone number, it's there on the screen, is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. If you want to chime in on any of the topics that I'm talking about, or, maybe something else too. If you pique my interest, maybe I'll answer the phone. We'll see. But there's the number. Phone lines are open. Go ahead and call. From the Cow Pie, the city of Rock Springs declared June Pride Month, and it is catching backlash. The city made the whole month Gay Pride Month, and boy, oh boy, people are upset, says the city councilman. The mayor countered that he wouldn't play gatekeeper on events. And so apparently anybody that wants a proclamation can go to the mayor of Rock Springs and he'll issue a proclamation. I wonder what the good mayor of Rock Springs would do if their local chapter of Satanists wanted to proclaim the month of July Satanism Awareness Month. I wonder what the mayor of Rock Springs would do. According to this, I mean, he doesn't want to play gatekeeper on anything. And so, if somebody asks for a proclamation, well, then he issues it. It's done. Let's see here. The city of Rock Springs officially declared this week to be Pride Month in the Southwest Wyoming city. It's done so for years, but this year's proclamation has generated a surge of backlash, as shown through 543 comments on the city's Facebook post and 43 shares as of Tuesday afternoon. That's far less scrutiny than the 3 comments and 5 shares a similar post got in 2024. Mayor Max Mickelson told the Cowboy, this year's heated election cycle, not just municipal, but at all levels, is driving public vitriol. Maybe what's driving public vitriol, and this is just a shot in the dark, is that government is involved in what's happening in your pants, or rather, what's happening outside of your pants. Maybe the city of Cheyenne is finally waking up and deciding that they don't really want to know. They don't either want to know. I mean, they don't want to know either what's going on in people's bedrooms. Mickelson says there's just a lot of strong feelings, and people are expressing those, which, again, absolutely, that's their protected First Amendment right. But it's the whole purpose of a city to create an environment where people can thrive. That's it. So that is what he's doing when he posted this picture. And let me just, hold on just a second. I just want to show you the picture that was on this post. And, you can judge for yourself what might be wrong with this. But here's what they posted. Let's make it big here from current slide. There we go. Yeah. In God we trust, and they're all holding pride flags, and there's the proclamation. And look at the shining smile on all of their faces. I'm sure that little kid right there in the front absolutely knows. Let's see here. Let me show this to you again. Oh, hold on. I think I erased it. So let me just show it to you one more time so we know what we're talking about here. Okay, so I'm sure that little kid right there in the front, I'm sure he knows exactly what's going on with this whole proclamation. And you notice that they're not all dressed in their garb, in the drag show garb that is so prevalent in Rock Springs. Nope, it's Mayor Max Mickelson. Now, if you're looking at this picture and you're wondering, gee, I wonder why they put it underneath, right in front of the sign that says, "In God We Trust." Because, my friends, this is an affront to the Lord Almighty. It is mocking him. And, if you're going to take a pride picture in front of a sign that says, "In God We Trust," that certainly didn't happen by accident. It is, I'm sure somebody was like, hey, why don't we take a picture in front of this "In God We Trust" sign? I find it to be offensive, and that... And I think that Claire McFarland actually points this out in the piece. Let's see here. Let me just scroll through here. Yeah, here we go. The city government's Monday Facebook post proclaiming June as Pride Month shows Mickelson standing in his suit along with City Councilman Jeannie DeMaas and a half a dozen other people, most of them holding pride flags. The photo backdrop features a banner above the city logo which reads, "In God We Trust." City Councilman Rick Malone has cast that as a bit of irony. Quote, he made the whole month Gay Pride Month, and boy, oh boy. Then he took that picture underneath, "In God We Trust." Well, that just tells you where the mayor of Rock Springs is at, that he wants to openly mock God, which that's what that is. I mean, you can't look at that picture and think and come up with any other conclusion. That is what they were doing. That was the whole motivation behind it, giving the big old middle finger to God. And, it is absolutely shocking to me. And, it's offensive to me, first, that the mayor would proclaim June Pride Month. We don't need an entire month. And what would happen in Rock Springs is the mayor, and here's another question for you, Max. What if I wanted a proclamation of White Heritage Month? What would you do with that one? My guess is it would probably get him tarred and feathered because of all of his constituents there. But, I mean, it is so outrageous that the city of Rock Springs is doing this that, I mean, it's really hard to describe it. And, again, this is another example of when the left says, oh, these crazy radical things, they don't happen in Wyoming. Yes, they do. They do all the time. Go take a drive to Rock Springs. Not that anybody would want to do that. But they absolutely happen in Wyoming. And Max, you should be absolutely ashamed of yourself. And by the way, if you want to come on the show and talk about how you smiled while you were mocking God, you are more than happy. You're more than welcome to. In fact, just go ahead and send me a Facebook message, or if one of my listeners wants to reach out to Max and say, "Hey, Max, why don't you go on Cowboy State Politics and talk about this?" We'll see if we can get him on. My guess is probably not. Probably not going to happen. All right, my friends, coming up after the break, it is Chuck Gray versus the Cow Pie. And I'm telling you, it is absolutely tremendous. So we'll do that in just a second. But first, an absolutely astounding display of pure capitalism. Something that, I mean, everybody understands, but the liberals, they don't want to admit it. So anyway, back in a minute.
Are you watching what's happening in our country and asking, what can I do? Join the John Birch Society in Salt Lake City, June 6th, for a powerful one-day conference. The day includes a host of respected speakers, 2 meals, and meaningful connections. You'll gain clarity on the issues and walk away with practical steps you can take to your community. Reserve your seat today at jbs.org/SLC26. That's jbs.org/SLC26.
One of those speakers at the Salt Lake City event will be yours truly. That's right, my friends. I'm one of the keynote speakers at the JBS 2026 conference. So join me in Salt Lake City if you want to see me. The following ad was paid for by Brent Bean for governor.
You won't find him leading a horse out of a barn or leaning against a corral with the sun setting behind him, because Wyomingites don't need a candidate who creates a good photo op. What you will find is a hard-working, experienced leader who believes Wyoming should always come first. A conservative grounded in strong values and steady principles. Ready to lead Wyoming the right way. Brent Bean for governor.
Today's program is also brought to you by Morton Buildings. If you're in the market for any type of building for your property, you need to call Marcos and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. They're the best in metal building construction, and they've been doing it longer than anybody else around. So it doesn't matter if it's a garage or a barn or maybe something bigger, like a roping arena or maybe a giant warehouse for your business. The 2 guys you need to call first are Marcos and Jesse. Again, their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out on their website, mortonbuildings.com. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. I'm David Iverson, and this is the most listened to conservative program in the great state of Wyoming. I, of course, am your host, doing what I was born to do with talent given to me by God himself, my friends. So I hope, did you see the announcement that we made yesterday on the Open Range record? By the way, that's the coffee pot going in the background. Anyway, did you see the announcement we made on the Open Range record? I've told you before, we're going to have a debate on July 16th, and it's going to be, we'll actually have two debates, a congressional debate and then a gubernatorial debate. And I've already got some pretty big names committed to it. And the way that we're going to figure out who's going to be on the debate stage, because there's 10 candidates, and it's absolutely impossible to run a debate, a fair debate, a debate that has any meaning whatsoever with 10 people on the stage. It's just not going to work. And so what we're going to do is narrow it down to 5. And so for the month of June, we're going to conduct a poll, and you pick the top 5 people that you want to see on that debate stage. And then on June 30th, we're going to release the results of the poll. And the top 5 people, those are going to be the folks that get invited to debate. And so my hope is, well, we're doing this for 3 reasons. One, to make our lives easier and to actually have a meaningful debate. The second is to get you involved so that you have a stake in, in what's going on and what's happening. And, you get to choose, hey, we want to hear from these people. And so we've already got a great response on the poll. Of course, we're not going to release the results until later. And before you even ask, even though the poll will accept multiple votes, it doesn't count them. So you only get to vote once. And so, let's say that one of the top 5 people chooses not to show up, like Eric Barlow has done this entire election season, just not show up. It's like no show Barlow. But anyway, if one of them decides not to debate, then we'll invite number 6 on the list, and we'll just go from there. And like I say, we've already got a couple people confirmed, and so it's a go. So I've posted the link to the poll in the comments, and just go ahead and click on that. It'll take you to the Open Range record, and then vote in the poll, and whatever you guys figure out, whoever you want to hear from, that's what we'll do. All right. So did you watch Chuck Gray's interview on the Cow Pie yesterday? I didn't, of course, because I was, doing my show, but it was absolutely tremendous. Anytime you get to watch the mainstream liberal Wyoming press get pushback from anybody, it's usually a pretty good time, because none of them even think, well, sure, some of them do, but, people like Claire McFarland and Jake in the Cow Pie, they're shocked at the suggestion that maybe they're not conservative. In fact, in the interview, which we're not going to watch it all, but we'll just watch a piece of it. But even in the interview, she looks aghast that Chuck would suggest that her reporting is liberal. But it is. And, and just run an experiment on your own. Try to find one article, just one, that is critical of any of the redcoats. That, Steve Harshman, Landon Brown, you name it. Any one of them that's critical of any of the redcoats. You'll have a hard time finding one. In fact, I've yet to find one where, there's a legitimate critical questioning of one of the liberals. But now do the same thing with conservatives. Try to find, one article that's critical of any of the conservatives on the Cow Pie, and you'll find hundreds, maybe 1,000. I don't know. It's pretty much every article that is written about a conservative is critical. And it's almost without fail, and and a lot of it has to do with the framing of articles. So let me just give you an example here. So a piece, and this is the piece that they're conducting the interview with Secretary of State Chuck Gray on. Let me just read you the opening paragraphs, and then I'll point out what I'm getting at here. So the piece is called Chuck Gray's U.S. House poll leveled disparaging remarks against Reisner and Freeze. And I quote, the poll, U.S. House candidate Chuck Gray touted Monday, leveled disparaging claims about the opponents Reed Reisner and Steve Freeze. It claimed Freeze never had a real job and that Reisner acted like a Hollywood celebrity during a marriage to his gay husband. He did have a husband. They did get married in Manhattan. One of these days, I'll pull up their marriage certificate so you can see it. The Cowboy reported early Monday that Gray sent a poll by a high-profile pollster, Fabrizio Lee and Associates, which worked with President Donald Trump's campaigns. The poll showed Gray leading at 21%, with 9 other candidates trailing at 14% or less. There was also 33% who were registered as strongly undecided. The poll also contained a push phrase, which, again, okay, so what does it mean to do a push? Okay, so if you sign up for notifications from the Open Range Record, and I publish an article, you'll receive what's called a push notification, which that means you don't have to do anything, but a notification that I've published an article goes straight to your device. So it gets pushed out to your registered device. That's what's meant by push. And so it's pretty much it's pretty inaccurate to call this poll a push poll now, or this section of it a push poll. Now, it could be that you're sent a text message that says, hey, participate in our poll. So the text message, it is pushed out to your device. But what they're suggesting in this article is that there was a section of the poll which just said, which candidate do you support? And then there was another section that contained message testing. That's the technical term that Claire McFarland didn't use, but just about all polls do that. In fact, right after I finished yesterday's program, I got a push poll or it was a phone call for a poll that Frank Chapman is running. It too contained messaging questions in it, though. I mean, they weren't disparaging; they were all about Frank Chapman, but it contained message testing in it as well. That's pretty common. Just about all polls do that. When you get to the end, there'll be subjective questions about different candidates, and hopefully they contain facts, which largely Chuck Gray's did. All right, so it's the Cowboy piece says the poll also contained a push phase. Okay, that's inaccurate, where recipients received information about Gray and 2 of his opponents, Casper businessman Reed Reisner and Teton County philanthropist Steve Freeze, according to a methodology breakdown included in the poll memo that Gray sent to the Cowboy. After the information dump, Gray's percentage points doubled, while Reisner's and Freeze's sunk. The information comprised bizarre and subjective campaign attacks, a survey recipient told the Cowboy State Daily. Who was the survey recipient? Ember Oakley, one of the most liberal members of the House of Representatives they got defeated in the last election. And here's another thing. We were talking about the bias of the Cowboy, which you're going to hear this in the interview when we get to it. But anytime Claire McFarland talks to what she calls politicos, it's usually old Stebby, Tim Stebson, and in this case, Ember Oakley, both liberals, and then another guy, whatever his name is, we'll get to him. Let's see here, propaganda, Rob Wallace. Okay, so Rob Wallace did serve in the Trump administration, but as Chuck Gray correctly points out in the interview, Rob Wallace has been pretty pro-Gordon. So anyway, I mean, a lot of people say that Gordon's conservative, but he's not. So anyway, Claire McFarland almost always goes to a liberal Politico for analysis, and sometimes she talks to John Baer when it directly pertains to him. But you'll notice that she didn't talk to a single conservative in this article, which is kind of Chuck Gray's point. Now, the piece goes on, and Ember Oakley calls the poll propaganda. Here's what it says. The initial ballot test is the key, Chuck Gray said. This is the standard in all polling. Oakley called it propaganda. Quote, I think the technical term is called push polling, she said. It's not. It's just done for propaganda and for campaign reasons. And in the prompts, Oakley said they clearly were just wanting to make writing things that were inflammatory. Well, yeah, because it's message testing, and Chuck Gray's a politician, and he's running for office. So, yeah, he's going to test the messaging. All right, so that kind of gives you the setup to it. So let me just play for you, and we're going to have to do a stop and start on this because I am not going to be able to contain myself going through this. But let's see here. Here we go. 6-3. Here we go. Chuck Gray versus the cow pie.
There are message points in the poll. And again, you refuse to look at my opponent's polls. You refuse to look at their tactics. These are very common to have message points in the polls, just like when you published an article 2 weeks ago, just in the headline and in the article, basically falsely saying that all of Reed Rasner's accusations, giving them credence. Whereas when I make a correct statement, you then immediately say that it's nasty or seems to have this bad tone, or I think in the headline you called it really pushy, or you used other negative connotations.
I have no
but
idea
with my
what you're talking about,
opponents,
firstly, but I
you
actually
treat it like it's, hold on, I gave you the time. Please don't interrupt. With my opponents, you just treat it like it's gospel. And this is the continued inaccurate reporting from Claire McFarland about our campaign. I'm going to continue to stand for the truth. And that is what I do. Even in
Okay, all right. So a couple of things here. What Chuck Gray is referring to is the piece that I just read to you segments of. And the title of the piece is Chuck Gray's U.S. House poll leveled disparaging remarks against Rasner. So even the title itself doesn't let the reader decide whether they're disparaging or not. This is what is referred to as, what I refer to as opinion journalism, that it's not really journalism at all. Rather, it's pushing an opinion of the writer and most of the time of the outlet, and making that look like journalism, but you're constantly pushing an agenda. And again, if you go back to the little experiment that I was telling you about, trying to find an article that's critical of one of the redcoats, Ember Oakley, for example, you won't be able to do it. And then you do the same thing with conservatives, and the same thing will happen. But yeah, so anyway, that's what he's referring to. Let's continue.
the light of the liberal media and your liberal reporting over the years, I continue to stand for the truth.
I think that you just made my dad laugh. So thank you. I'm sure he got a kick out of that one. Thanks so much.
It's
Hi,
the
Dad.
truth.
So this statement about Steve Freese, you composed.
Again, there are message points in the polls. Fabrizio conducted the poll. How did I conduct the poll? I don't call people and conduct the poll. So again, another false statement by Claire McFarland on our campaign.
I called it a poll you touted.
It's a poll that our campaign worked with Fabrizio on.
Right, and I had asked you during the formation of this story whether you commissioned it. You didn't answer that. So safely, I went with language.
You didn't say you were writing another story. You falsely acted like you were asking follow-up questions
on the loaded nature.
So again, another inaccurate statement from Claire McFarland, false defamatory statements.
Oh, so we're doing defamatory charges now. Okay, so I had an interview with Steve Freese 6-ish weeks ago, and I confronted him with some of the stuff you said about him after he entered the race. Would you like to know what his response was?
Or focus on our campaign. I think I'm focused on the issues, on advancing our Wyoming core industries, our coal, our oil and gas, our soda ash, our ag industries that have been under attack from the left now for over 30 years. And we have these insiders and these leftists, the media, Mark Gordon, the Democrats that are trying to change our state with this woke wind, with these data centers, and we need to advance our core industries.
Okay, all right. But one of the funniest parts of this for me is just watching the reaction of Claire McFarland. And you can tell, like right there where I paused it, you can tell that she's shocked that with what Chuck is saying. Now, in her defense, when Chuck is on a roll, it's pretty hard to get him to stop. I mean, he's pretty good at controlling the conversation, which is clearly what he was doing there. I mean, and so, I mean, in her defense, it's pretty difficult. However, what you're going to see in just a minute is her trying to push back on Chuck Gray, and there's a difference between saying, now wait a minute, you said this, and this, previously. How does that square with what you just told me? Now, a good example of doing that is when I interviewed Jimmy Skogard. I let him talk, and then when there was an incorrect statement, I was like, whoa, okay, so hold on. You just said this. That's incorrect. Here's the truth. Or explain to me why what you're saying is absolutely the truth. Now, there's a difference between what I do and what Claire McFarland allegedly does. This is an opinion show. It's my opinion, and it's my show, which is why you watch it. What Claire McFarland attempts to do, or wants you to believe that she does, is journalism. Okay, so she's straight reporting the facts. But what you're going to see here in just a second is not necessarily journalism. It's what I referred to earlier, opinion journalism. And this is, it's not just the cow pie. I mean, you can look at pretty much any media outlet, except for this one, and to some degree, maybe the Open Range Record, but I'll get to that in just a second. But most of what you see from the mainstream media is what I refer to as opinion journalism. It's not really journalism at all. It's opinion that is dressed up to look like news. Now, the difference between what we do at the Open Range Record and what the Cow Pie does is we tell you, this is opinion, this is news. This might be, and there's a couple of them that I think I labeled analysis or opinion analysis. But at the very least, we're saying, hey, this is opinion. We know it's opinion, and we're going to label it an opinion. Now, we do get comments every once in a while say, well, you know, the framing that you use, you know, makes you to believe one thing or another. Yeah, I'm not going to apologize for writing about a land swap that a sitting Wyoming senator got for 80 acres at the base of Devil's Tower, which is probably priceless, which absolutely helps his private business. I am not going to apologize for being critical of that. I mean, that is absolutely appropriate. So there's a difference between that and every single article that you've written being critical of the Redcoats, which is, you know, largely what the Cow Pie does. So let's continue with Chuck Gray versus the Cow Pie.
Our coal, our oil and gas, our ag,
so Steve
our
Freese
soda
actually
ash.
said
We need to stop the illegal immigration, the border, and codify the executive actions that President Trump has put into place, and the sanctuary cities, just like I work to do in Wyoming with our bill banning sanctuary cities. We need to get that to the finish line. And then we must pass the Save America Act, proof of citizenship for registering to vote and voter ID. Both bills that I was the lead on voter ID and then proof of citizenship for registering to vote. We brought forward that rulemaking in 2023. They got that to the finish line. So we've got to get the Save America Act done.
It's an interview, not a campaign commercial. Steve Freese said, I've been very grateful. You're trying
to focus on...
He said, I've been very grateful for Chuck Gray because he helped to advance meaningful policies when he was in the House. That was his response to these attacks.
Great, I have a track record. I have a track record of getting things done.
Elitism is that he was grateful. And then, as these attacks have continued to come out, I haven't been able to get him to comment and fire back at you. What do you think about that?
I have a track record of getting things done. How about Reed Rasner, who has been committing defamation towards me now for 2.5 months? You guys have now published 2 articles repeating his false statements, even though they're false and defamatory.
I fact-checked Reed Rasner at length.
And
I have fact-checked Reed
and acting like they're
okay. Well, so let's just talk about her fact-checking and you know it. I would say that if you try to verify what somebody said and you find a couple of sources that say, okay, yes, they indeed did say that, and this is the case. Okay, we can classify that as fact checking. I do that a lot, right? And you know, occasionally, it wasn't that long ago that, remember, it was that story about the crazy law in Washington. Yeah, I got that one wrong, but. You know, we looked at a couple sources and we're like, oh, okay, well, this sounds like this is something that guy would do. And so we rolled with it. Okay, so, yeah, I'm sure that Claire McFarland did fact check some of the things that Reed Rasner said, but I'll give you a good example of where she got it wrong. Now, there are 3 votes that Chuck Gray voted in favor of a project that contained a wind component. But those were existing leases, the two that I've looked at. I didn't look at three of them. I looked at two of them. But those were existing leases. And yes, they did have a wind component on it, but in at least one of them, the wind component powered parts of the other projects. So they were existing. And yes, he did vote in favor of those. What he has not voted in favor of are new wind projects. The Pronghorn one, the one down in the Chugwater area, he's not voted in favor of those. And so when Reed Reisner says, hey, he's voted for 3 wind projects, okay, technically, I guess that's true, but there's more context that's needed there. And so, when we use the word fact-checking, I think we need to be very careful of it. Did you find out that this is absolutely 100% correct? And did you find out that it's being used in context? Did you find out that what you're writing is 100% correct? And most of the time, and you know what? In Claire's defense, I think she does a fair job at fact-checking things. I mean, she does call around and tries to figure out if that's the correct story. But some of the things that Reed Reisner has said are not correct about Chuck Gray's record. And so to unilaterally claim that, well, I fact-checked it all, I don't know that that's necessarily true, because if you had, you would find out that there's a difference in those 3 wind votes that Reed Reisner has been talking about. It's very different than a new wind project. But, okay, so from the outset, he did vote for him. All right, so let's see here. Yeah, let's do a little bit more here.
Gospel, acting like these comments are basically in the headline and the initial 5 paragraphs, like they have credence to them.
I have fact-checked Reed Reisner at length. He has correctly pointed out that
I didn't see anything in the headlines and in the, you look at the articles, there's a huge difference between the way you treat our.
Okay, so did you hear what she said? That you had a huge about face on wind. Well, that's not necessarily true. Okay, again, there were 3 existing leases, and yeah, they did have a wind component, but it's not the same thing as building a brand new giant wind farm around Douglas. Okay, those are tangentially related, but they're 2 different things. It's not a giant project that's completely devoted to wind. Okay, so and another one of the leases that he voted against was the crazy one to create synthetic jet fuel. Okay, so there's a lot more context to there, and so for Claire McFarland to say, well, I thoroughly fact checked him, and you had a total about face about wind. I don't know if that's necessarily accurate. Context is important, and you got to include that. Here's a little bit more.
Contrasts the points that we make and the points of our opponents. And
is it my fault that you had
this shows the continued attempt by the media to stop our campaign. And why do they want to stop our campaign? Because I have a track record of getting these things done. The media has been used to controlling Wyoming politics for so long, and we've broken that. We stopped Democrats from crossing over into the Republican primary. We passed voter ID, all things that you tried to denigrate along the way, Claire McFarland. We passed proof of citizenship for registering to vote.
I reported accurately on a lawsuit. I didn't try to denigrate any of this. I don't know where these claims are coming from.
Your tone has always been opposed.
All right. Well, apparently we lost the connection there for a little bit. Let's see if we can just hit unpause.
To the conservative work that we've been doing. And then remember when they made the false statement that I had taken straw donations at the end of the Secretary of State's campaign. That was reprinted by Cowboy State Daily. I've yet to receive an apology for that. And when I asked you that you said that I didn't report on too much looking at the truth and the past and whatever. It doesn't matter. This is a struggle. But
okay, now remember, words mean things, my friends. And so if you listen critically, if you listen carefully to what Chuck Gray said, he asked Claire McFarland, who does work for the Cowboy, their chief political reporter, for an apology about what the Cowboy printed in the previous campaign. Now, you heard Claire McFarland say, well, I wasn't in politics at that time. And Chuck Gray then says, well, what you told me was that was too much looking at the past, etc. So if you listen to what he says on that one, he didn't accuse her of writing it. He said the Cowboy State Daily. And so, I mean, there's a ton of stuff in there. And the whole interview goes about 15 minutes. But, I mean, it is tremendous. You should go watch it. It was yesterday on Jake in the Cow Pie. And I mean, really, you should go watch the whole thing. I laughed hysterically sitting here in the studio watching it. And I mean, again, go check it out on your own. It's tremendous. You're absolutely going to love it. So let's go ahead and take another break. And when we come back, we'll continue on with the program. I'm going to show you what Claire McFarland published right after that interview. And you tell me if she's entirely unbiased and just doing journalism. I'll show it to you in just a second. I know that you think it's spring and that the weather is just going to continue to warm up and you don't have to worry about snow or ice or 30-degree temperatures anymore. In case you've forgotten, this is Wyoming, my friend, and that sort of thinking doesn't work here. 1 minute, it could be 75 and sunny, and 10 minutes later, snow. Whatever the weather, you need a pair of socks that'll keep your feet cool and dry even on the hottest of summer days. And if you happen to run into that spring snowstorm, you'll stay nice and toasty warm. Well, your feet anyway. To get you a pair, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. These are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia,
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell. Iceland.
France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the last year and a half been more than you could bear? Well, if it has, you've come to the right place. Call my friend Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy state politics is only getting stronger, and that is all thanks to you, my friends. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for everything you do for this program. Make sure that you don't miss a minute of Cowboy State Politics Live, the podcast, and now the Open Range Record. And while I'm on the subject, I put the link to our congressional debate poll in the comments. Go take the poll. And what we're doing is we're going to run a poll for the month of June to determine who is going to be on our debate stage on July 16th down in Casper at the Rialto Theater. It's going to be a great event, and I'm telling you, I'm getting, I was excited when we came up with the idea, but as the days go on, man, I am just getting absolutely amped up about it. It's going to be a fun time. You know me, I love debates. That's how I paid for college, and so anytime I get the chance to run a a straight up fair debate, which is what it's going to be, I jump at the chance. It's a lot of fun. It's going to be a great event, and we're gonna try to class things up a little bit. So anyway, go vote. Go to the poll. Links in the comments. Go check it out. By the way, also you can see down there on the screen, I've got the phone number to the studio on there, and phone lines are open if you want to chime in on what we're talking about. 307-374-8989. Now, when you're conducting an interview, it's important for you, the person conducting it, to be in control of the interview. In my opinion, there's nothing more embarrassing than if a guest were to take control of my interview, which doesn't happen on Cowboy State Politics. And there's a couple of ways that you do that. So if you know that the interview you're conducting is going to be a little contentious, well, you need to be straight up with the person you're interviewing from the very beginning. You say, look, this is an interview. It's not a campaign stop. And so I'll ask the questions, you answer them, and I'm probably going to interrupt you if you keep going on. Just be straight up about it. And then, and if you listen to any of my interviews, and again, the Jimmy Skogard one is a good example of that. When I want to interject, it'll be something like, whoa, hold on just a second. Or you'll hear me say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but here's this, and ask another question. But you got to be in control. And one of the ways that you do that, and this seems kind of heavy-handed, but sometimes you'll see it on TV, that when you have a subject of an interview that is, and I'm not saying Chuck was doing this. Well, he was to a small degree, but just going on and on and on, you just say, excuse me, I'm conducting the interview. If they keep going, excuse me, I'm going to mute your mic. And if it keeps going, then you just hit mute. And then you make your point and you unmute them, which usually that doesn't end up so good. But if that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do. You don't engage in a back and forth, and certainly don't if you're Claire McFarland and you're supposedly a journalist. Don't interject your opinion. Now, again, in her defense, Chuck can be kind of hard to deal with, especially in that environment. Like, they both knew it was going to be contentious going into that interview. And so both of them were probably loaded for bear. And so difficult situation, but Chuck totally got the upper hand in that one. Now, remember, through the whole interview, or at least the segment that I played for you, Claire repeatedly said, oh, I'm not biased. I don't do that. I correctly report the facts. Really? Not 15 minutes after I finished this program, which was approximately about 45 minutes after the end of that interview, Claire McFarland, or the Cowpie, published this little gem from the leftist loony lawyer in Cheyenne. From the Cowpie, Chuck Gray's U.S. House. Oh, no, it's the wrong one there. Hold on here. Here we go. That's the right one. Attorney asks Wyoming Supreme Court for special prosecutor to investigate Chuck Gray. All right, any objective person will look at the law, look at that complaint that was filed by this loony leftist lawyer in Cheyenne and say, it's a load of garbage. It's a load of crap. Like, there's nothing really to it. He's asking for a special prosecutor now to investigate Chuck Gray for allegedly releasing confidential information. So what confidential information could there possibly be? First of all, it was asked by the Department of Justice. Chuck Gray, it's been reported by the Cowpie that Chuck Gray consulted the Attorney General, Keith Couts, and said, hey, can I release this? Keith Couts says, yep, it's valid. And so he releases it. Okay, so what information could that possibly entail? Now, I went 2 days ago to the courthouse and got a registered voters list from the clerk's office. In there contains the party affiliation, the address, where they voted, party affiliation. There's that information. But in the Secretary of State's documentation, you'll have Social Security numbers, driver's license numbers, those things. Well, guess who creates Social Security numbers? The federal government. And your driver's license number? That's everywhere. How many times during a given week do you pull out your driver's license for a whole bunch of different things? And that little barcode on the back, Yeah, that's not just your driver's license number. That contains all of the information associated with your driver's license, which, I hate to tell it to you, contains your social security number. And that's not private, okay? It's not private at all. And so to say that Chuck Gray released confidential information, first, it's not confidential anyway, at least as far as the DOJ is concerned. And second, all of that is available in a whole bunch of different places anyway. So the lawsuit and the complaint, absolute bunk. But what is more telling is the timing. This thing was published right after that interview. And so, I mean, it's a clear indicator. And this is a lot of what the Cowboy does. I mean, it's a clear example of, all right, so we didn't like the interview that Chuck Gray just gave us, and so we're going to publish another article that makes him look terrible. And let me just read you the opening paragraphs of it, and you can decide for yourself. Quote, Cheyenne attorney George Powers, the leftist loony lawyer, who filed a complaint calling for a criminal investigation against Chuck Gray for releasing sensitive voter data to the federal government, asked the Wyoming Supreme Court on Tuesday to appoint a special prosecutor. The Cheyenne-based attorney who filed a complaint calling for the criminal investigation against Secretary Chuck Gray. All right, yeah. George Powers is asked the High Court to issue an order commanding Wyoming Attorney General Keith Couts and the Attorney General's office to recuse themselves from investigating whether Gray could have committed a crime. Powers started filing the public records requests after news broke that Gray had released sensitive voter data. Powers, an attorney who beat the Wyoming Department of Education in different records challenges in 2023. But it goes on and on and on and on and on. And here's the part where it mentions the Social Security number. Has pointed repeatedly to a state law that says election records containing portions of Social Security numbers and driver's license numbers are not public record. Depends on who's asking. If it's the Department of Justice, they already have that information anyway, and so it's not confidential. And it goes on. But you read this thing, and there's never a suggestion that, never presenting the either side. And again, it's one of these pieces that McFarland has written that's just like, it goes on and on and on. And usually what happens is she'll tell you what's new in the article, and then it's literally cut and paste. And it turns out making her pieces like 8 pages long. So anyway, there's everything on the leftist loony lawyer, the Looney Tunes at the Cowboy, and just be critical of what you hear in the media. And what I mean by being critical is do some thinking about the messages that you're hearing. Ask yourself, okay, does it present both sides? Is it opinion or is it news? Did they talk to anybody else? Is there, did they consult statutes? What supporting documentation does the article have? Now, often, and another good example. So on the open range record, often you'll see links throughout the article. And it's pretty regular that we quote other reporting. And so what you'll see is, X was reported in the Cowboy State Daily on this date, and then there's a link to the article, and you can go read it later. Or there's other supporting documentation. And so, and I can tell you for a fact that there are a lot of pieces that I get. And if you talk to any of our journalists, they'll tell you that sometimes I'll send it back to them, and it'll go back and forth 2 or 3 times, correcting different sections of it, working on the language. And we're very careful to make sure that what we're reporting is accurate, and if there's a claim made that we can prove it and that it was reported elsewhere, and that there's a source to back it up. And it's no different than writing your high school term paper, that you cite your sources, you prove what you're saying, and if it's opinion, you say it's opinion. And there's been a couple of times where an article's been written, and I think it's a pretty good piece. But there's a section at the end that I think is also well written, but it's opinion. And what you'll see down at the bottom says author's opinion. And then it's just very clear about it. I mean, it shouldn't be revolutionary. It shouldn't be out of the norm for a media outlet to be clear. This is opinion. This is news. Now, is it possible to be 100% unbiased? And the answer to that is no. Nobody is 100% unbiased. Because, I mean, bias exists in the language that you use, your word choice, those sorts of things. And everybody has an opinion on just about everything. And so it's impossible to eliminate all bias out of it. And the way that you handle that in journalism is that you present both sides. And when the people that you're talking to back up your piece are entirely leftists, Ember Oakley, Tim Stubbson, come on, you can't make the claim that you're being unbiased. And you know, in this program, I come right out in front and tell you, this is an opinion show. And it's my opinion. And, you know, the reason you watch it and you listen to it is you want to hear my opinion about things. As it relates to that, a story that I meant to tell you about yesterday that we didn't get to was Monday's edition of the podcast, which, by the way, if you want to hear a replay of today's program, I'm going to publish it on the podcast shortly after we're done with today's live program. But anyway, on Monday, I handicapped the entire U.S. House of Representatives race. And I had the episode done before I saw the poll results. And I first saw them come out in the cow pie. And then Chuck Gray sent me his poll results. But I correctly handicapped the whole thing. And here's how I did it. I just figured that and it's still subjective, but I tried to do an analysis of, name recognition. Probably one of the more important things if you're running for office. People are not going to vote for you if they don't know who you are. And so name recognition, definitely important. Now, without a doubt in this election, I think from the outset and definitely right now, it's Chuck Gray. He was in the House of Representatives for a long time, ran a statewide election for Secretary of State. And I mean, he's been pretty active. I mean, even all through his time as Secretary of State, Chuck would attend just about every event that he could make it to. I mean, name recognition way up there. And so in my analysis, I had him at the top. Second, only because he's the budding social media influencer, Reed Reisner, because he's spending a heck of a lot of money on ads. I put him number 2 simply because, I mean, just about everybody's seen one of his ridiculous ads on TV or watched one of his YouTube shorts. And I mean, you know, when he fails in this election, perhaps he could just move his career into social media influencing and creating YouTube shorts because he's getting a heck of a lot of views. And then, Steve Freeze, he sent out a lot of campaign mailers. I haven't counted, but I think I'm up to number 6 so far. Oh, by the way, Steve Freeze is going to be in the studio on June 12th. He's going to be in Sheridan, and so he's going to sit down in the studio and have a conversation with me. And I've been looking forward to that. Been trying to get him on the telephone. And I've got several messages to him, but we finally got it set up yesterday. So June 12th, Steve Freeze in the studio. And tomorrow, well, since we're talking about the schedule, tomorrow, Zeta Anderson from Crook County, she's running for the House of Representatives. She's going to be joining us on the program at 9:00. And then on Friday, since we're talking about schedules, I'm not going to be in the studio on Friday. I'm heading to that event in Salt Lake City to give a speech to the John Birch Society. So we won't have a program on Friday, though I'm hoping that we will still have a podcast. I haven't quite got that done yet. All right, so let's see here. Where are we at? Oh, yeah, one more thing. So I told you yesterday, right after I finished the program, I answered a phone call, and it was a poll from Frank Chapman. Frank Chapman was also on the program. I think we had a pleasant conversation. You should go back and watch that interview. But I wanted to play for you a section of the poll just so you can see that. And there's nothing disparaging in the poll that I took from Frank Chapman. But what I wanted to show you is that just about every candidate tests messaging in their polling, right? You do the initial questions, who you're going to vote for, who you like, those sorts of things. And then there's almost always a section where the person who sponsored the poll does message testing. And that is, they just play read a statement, and then they ask you your reaction to it. So just listen to this. This is just to show you that all candidates do it. And again, there's nothing disparaging in here. It's all talking about Frank Chapman. But just take a listen for a minute.
For the next few questions, please tell me whether each statement would make you more likely or less likely to support Frank Chapman for Congress. Frank Chapman is a politician outsider. Frank Chapman is a political outsider who has taken on the federal government his whole life. Would you say that makes you much more likely, somewhat less likely, much less likely, or no difference to vote for Frank Chapman?
Somewhat more likely. Okay, so hold on just a second. Pay no attention to my responses. I was just answering them in just to see if there was another section of the poll, because sometimes you do polls, and depending on your answers, Better Wyoming does this all the time. Depending on your answers, if you hate the Freedom Caucus, then they'll continue the poll. But I was just answering kind of in the positive for Frank Chapman to see if there was a another section of the poll. So pay no attention to my answers. Let's continue.
Frank Chapman is a trusted conservative fighter with a proven track record of standing up for our constitutional rights. Would you say that makes you much more likely, somewhat less likely, much less likely, or no difference to vote for Frank Chapman?
More likely.
Is that much more or somewhat more?
Somewhat more.
Frank Chapman will always fight to protect our land and our guns and our values. Would you say you would be much more likely, somewhat less likely, much less likely, or no difference to vote for Frank Chapman?
Somewhat more likely.
Frank Chapman is endorsed by CPAC, or the Conservative Political Action Conference, for his conservative record. Would you say that makes you much more likely, somewhat less likely, much less likely, or no difference to vote for Frank Chapman?
I think they're irrelevant. No difference.
Right now, in general, if a candidate for Congress is a strong supporter or President Trump, let me repeat. This is the first
Okay,
time
all right. So I think that's enough. My whole point in this is just to show you that just about every poll has message testing in it, and what they were doing with those questions is to see how voters would react to that particular question. And so depending on the response, if one of those got a higher response than others, well, then the candidate would go with that one. And that's the same thing that was going on in the Fabrizio poll. And it was just to see which sort of messaging resonated with voters. And, all candidates, all polls do this. Some of them are biased. You haven't seen any reporting from the Cowboy about the polls that Better Wyoming has been doing. I mean, it's been crickets about those, and some of those are pretty terrible. The lovely Christine has gotten several polls on her phone. I don't get contacted by Better Wyoming, but anyway, there's been several of them that answer a couple questions, and then it's pretty much, why do you hate the Freedom Caucus? Tell us the top 10 reasons why you hate the Freedom Caucus. I mean, and it's just on and on and on. But there hasn't been any reporting about that. And if indeed polling is a newsworthy subject, then you would think that would be part of it, but apparently not. So anyway, there you have the whole poll question, the interview with the Cowboy, Chuck versus the Cowboy. So let's move on. Now, there's a piece I saw from our pal Marta Mossberg, and she invariably she'll send one of her opinion pieces to the Open Range Record. She didn't send this one, but I think this is great. So this is a totally different subject, but one of the bigger campaign, at least the left is really trying hard to make this a campaign issue, is public lands. And the framing of it, at least and there are two articles that the Open Range Record has written about Protect Wyoming, and that's the Political Action Committee, and they claim that their number one purpose is public lands. But their messaging is surrounded by, or is, how do I want to put this, is almost exclusively pertains to recreation. So hunting, fishing, outdoor activities. What they don't mention is multiple use. And what I mean by that is like public lands ought to be used for, any purpose they can, because they're public, right? And so that's why the state of Wyoming auctions off oil and gas leases. That's why we have coal mines on federal property. By the way, the federal government owns all the coal, and so you just lease section, you produce it, and then the coal company gets paid for producing the coal. But these public lands folks, they don't want to talk about multiple use. And one of the ways that one big attempt during the Biden administration to lock up public lands was to lease it for conservation uses. Now, first, words mean things. Okay, conservation, the way the left uses it, does not mean what you think it means. In Wyoming terms, conservation means responsibly using the resources that you have so that they will continue. A good example of that is our game and fish. They're experts in managing wildlife, and so every year we issue a certain number of hunting permits in a given area. And yes, that's for recreation, but it's also to manage the population. And those permit numbers go up and down year over year. Maybe you have a bad winter kill and there aren't as many animals around. And so the game and fish would reduce the number of permits issued in that particular area. Or on the other hand, let's say you have a glut in the animal population and there's a bunch of ranchers that are getting their alfalfa fields decimated by giant herds of elk. Well, they might issue more permits in that area. But one of the ways that the left has tried to lock up federal lands is through so-called conservation. What the left means when they use the word conservation really is preservation. Okay, there's a difference between those two things. Conservation is responsibly using the resources that you have. Preservation is keeping it pristine, away from human contact. That's how the left uses it. And the attempt by the Biden administration to authorize the leasing of public lands for conservation was an end run around their resource management plans that got halted. There were two big ones, the Rock Springs Management Plan and the Buffalo Management Plan, that would have locked out human contact on federal lands. And as it relates to that, the Buffalo RMP would have ended coal development on federal lands in Campbell and Johnson, in the entire Powder River Basin. And it would be done under the name of conservation, which again, that doesn't mean what you think it means. The way the left uses it, that's preservation. But here's what Mossberg says in her piece. The Trump administration, quoting now, is restoring congressional intent by removing conservation from the Bureau of Land Management's mandate. The Biden-era rule put non-use on par with grazing, mineral extraction, and recreation in a flagrant disregard for the Federal Land Policy Management Act of 1976, which mandates that 245 million acres of federal land be managed under the principles of multiple use and sustained yield. So, in other words, what the Biden administration did is they classified conservation, which really means preservation, under the same category as oil and gas, coal, and grazing. And so you could lease a chunk of property allegedly for conservation, and you could lock it up from any human contact. As the BLM noted in its rule change, quote, it is not appropriate or logical to treat conservation as a use under FLIPMA. Under a more appropriate interpretation and implementation of FLIPMA's mandate, the BLM works to responsibly conserve resources to ensure balanced development while also achieving long-term productivity of these resources, in all cases consistent with the principles of multiple use and sustained yield. This may be achieved through land management efforts, including a partnership with other entities, but it does not follow that FLIPMA's leasing authority allows for conservation. And the reason why it doesn't is the way the left was using conservation as a lease tool was non-use. In other words, locking it up, preserving it, preventing human contact of those federal lands. And so by definition, it was a non-use. And the whole point in FLIPMA is to use or conserve public lands. And think about your pocketbook, right? When you spend conservatively, you don't go buy outrageous things, right? You focus on the things that you need, and occasionally you buy the things that you want, but you don't turn into a spendthrift. You're conservative with your money. the same principle applies to federal lands or any public land, not just federal, state property or your own private property. You know, the reason why ranchers rotate their stock on their in their pastures, you don't want to overgraze a section of your pasture, and so you let the animals eat in one place, and then you move them, and you let this place over here recover while they're eating over here. You conserve the land that you're using. That is not, and again, I cannot stress this enough, that is not the same thing as the way the left uses it. Continuing. And not only did the Biden rule thumb its nose at the rule of law, but it would have severely impacted land available for grazing livestock, petroleum and mineral extraction, hunting, and other recreational use. Ultimately, this would have led to thousands of jobs lost and nearly $1 billion in foregone revenue in Wyoming, according to estimates from petroleum groups, not to mention cutting off access to millions of acres. Governor Gordon had previously testified against the decision before Congress, and that is classifying conservation as a use of federal property. And Wyoming, along with Utah, challenged it in federal court. One of the few things that Governor Gordon did that I actually agree with. Both states have huge percentages of federal land, which makes up slightly less than half of Wyoming and about 64% in Utah. Governor Greg Gianforte in Montana also strongly supports the rule change for similar reasons. Protecting land and using it for recreation and purposes that generate economic activity can happen simultaneously, as they did for decades prior to Biden's rule change. The rescission brings common sense back to federal land management while also protecting the livelihoods of thousands who responsibly make a living on our shared inheritance. So the whole point is, when you hear somebody talk about federal public lands, you got to make sure that your definitions are correct, that multiple use is included in their idea of using public lands. And it's for a number of reasons. One, I mean, it's your right to be able to exploit the minerals that are there. And if you buy a lease, you ought to be able to exploit it. But secondly, it's to help out the land too. You know, one of the big challenges we face every year in Wyoming is wildfires. And so if you have a section of ground that's been cut off from every kind of human contact, the grass is going to grow really high. It's not going to be grazed. One of the reasons why you allow grazing is to cut down on the grass, and so to decrease the possibility of a wildfire. So there's a number of reasons here to allow multiple use. And so when you hear folks start screaming about public lands, you got to keep in mind that it needs to be multiple use, because that's the whole point of FLPMA. They're public lands, and also there's a conservation or I don't want to use the word protection, but that's kind of what it is, a protection component of it too. Wildfires are a big thing. If you got really tall grass, it's going to burn. So anyway, I mean, I think Mossberg is right on the point here that it's absolutely a good thing that Trump removed that whole stupid conservation as use thing. 'Cause, I mean, it not only is it contradictory, but it flies in the face of common sense, which is largely what happens with federal policy. So let's go ahead and take another break. And when we come back, we'll finish up the program. We're going to talk a little bit more about the media, this time on a national level. Back in a minute. By the way, if you want to be part of the show, there's the phone number. Give me a call. Are you sick to death of being told what to think? Maybe you don't even realize that it's happening. Freedom Caucus bad, big spending, big government, liberal, Republican good. Conservatives are bad and they want to starve little children. I have heard it all, my friends. We are way past the time when the news was just the news, if it ever was. But wouldn't it be nice if you had a news platform that was at least honest about what they were telling you? News on the news page, opinion on the opinion page. That's exactly what the Open Range Record is. Go to the website, openrangerecord.com. News, analysis, opinion, and investigative journalism. One more time, that website is openrangerecord.com. You can listen and watch Cowboy State Politics live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble every Tuesday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pay attention to all that other block-headed, Borg-like so-called news if you want. But if you want to get the real story, watch Cowboy State Politics live. And now, back to the program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live on a Wednesday. Moving through the program, bashing every redcoat in sight. I'm your host, David Iverson. Thanks for watching the program and welcome back from the break. Home Movies 1141 says, since the federal government owns half the public lands in Wyoming, it's actually the California and New York public trying to lock Wyoming citizens out of Wyoming lands. I would say to a large degree, you're right on that one, because many of the people, many of the groups that were trying to lease public lands for uses of so-called conservation really were groups that originate outside Wyoming. Though, make no mistake, my friends, there are groups inside Wyoming that really aren't interested in multiple use. And I can't stress how important this is. That we have to have multiple use for all of the reasons that I told you about before the break. It's super important. And, when you talk about Wyoming's way of life, man, we all use public lands. Well, I shouldn't say all, but most of us use public lands. And we've got something here that is not, it's not the same as it is in the eastern half of the United States. There really is no public land. Well, I shouldn't say that. The further east you go, there is less and less public land. When I lived in Virginia, the only way that you were going to hunt is if you knew somebody that would let you go hunt. There was no public land. And so unless you knew somebody, you're not going to go hunting. Here it's very different. Just about everybody can go hunting. And, there's plenty of public land, so you can go, everybody can go hunt on it. Though, there's some questions about access. We did an interview with David Fobian at the Guns and Ammo magazine. I think it was last week. It was a great interview. And, he's got somewhat of a different opinion that I do, but he's the guy that used a helicopter to access a landlocked chunk of public land. It's a fascinating discussion. You should go back and listen to it. So when Trump is president, you can always count on him going after the media. And it is, I shouldn't say going after, that's the wrong way to put it, holding the media accountable, which is what Chuck was doing on the cow pie yesterday. Let me give you another example. CBS News terminates Scott Pelley's contract after he hijacked a staff meeting. Now, Scott Pelley used to work on 60 Minutes. And, all right, so we could admit that 60 Minutes is it's a pretty progressive program run by a bunch of liberals. And it was taken over by Barry Weiss, who is the founder of the Free Press. And, she's been making a lot of changes there. And Scott Pelley, he doesn't like him at all, because Scott Pelley, along with a lot of most of the people in the mainstream media, is another one of these radical liberals. Well, Nick Britton, he's the executive producer of CBS's News 60 Minutes, he terminated the contract of Scott Pelley after the guy had a meltdown and disparaged Bilton during a meeting. Now, Nick Bilton has been put in charge of 60 Minutes. So he's the boss, all right? He's the guy running the show. And they had this meeting, And Scott Pelley has a meltdown in the middle of it, and he questions the boss's credentials for being able to run this venerable news program. Dylan Byers, a founding partner and senior correspondent at Puck, shared a letter from Bilton to Scott Pelley in which Bilton criticized Pelley for having, quote, hijacked his first staff meeting. Quote, "Dear Mr. Pelley," Bilton said, "I meant what I said in my letter last week to the 60 Minutes team. Joining 60 Minutes is the honor of my career, and I'll be grateful to be working alongside the people who have contributed to the most important television journalism brand this country has ever produced." I don't know if that's actually the case, but just about all of us have watched an episode of 60 Minutes, or when you were younger, that was one of the programs that got put on the TV, and that if you wanted to watch TV, well, that's what you were watching. Bilton admitted that he was new to 60 Minutes. He had devoted his career to investigative journalism and storytelling, however. Quote, "I started this job excited to collaborate and to benefit from the wisdom and experience from the 60 Minutes veterans, with you among them. For that reason, one of the first things I did in my new role was to call you and take you out to dinner." Bilton continued to note that despite how Pelley had acted, it is a profound disappointment to you that you rejected that overture and chose to ambush me instead. Yesterday, you hijacked my first meeting with staff to disparage me, my qualifications, and my intentions with remarkable incivility and contempt. Bilton continued to note that despite how Pelley had acted, he had been hopeful that they could find a path forward together. But Pelley made it clear that he was not interested. And so he said that CBS News was terminating your contract with cause effective immediately. So holding the media accountable. And the way that we do that in the market is by not buying their product. Like if you don't like a product or how it's run or the company, then don't buy it, right? Don't pay any attention to it. The reason, like how the cow pie makes money, and frankly, this program, is through advertising. And so if you don't have viewers to watch your program, then you're not going to have advertisers that pay you to advertise on your program. And so if you don't like what a media outlet is doing, don't help the people that hate you. I mean, stop looking at the liberal drivel and get your news elsewhere. It's no more complicated than that, my friends. And think about the whole Bud Light thing when that was going on, when they made those special cans with the man pretending to be a woman, Dylan Mulvaney. A whole bunch of people across the country stopped buying Bud Light. And that sent a message to their corporate officers saying, hey, maybe you ought to back away from all this liberal nonsense and just do what you're good at, which I don't think they're all that great at making beer. But anyway, we just stop getting into the political crap and, start just doing what you're doing. And a personal example, when the lovely Christine and I were on our honeymoon, we were in Utah. She's got family that lives in Utah, so we drove down there to see them. And there was this great Harley-Davidson dealership, but that was right in the middle of all of these big corporate entities being exposed for having, DEI meetings and forcing their employees to go through all of this crap. So we walk into this big, huge, really cool Harley dealership. And I told my new wife, I said, okay, so we're going to go talk to him first. And then if we like what we hear, then maybe we'll check out their big sale that they've got going on. So I walked right up to the customer service desk and I said, is there somebody here that owns this joint? And a lady, she had her back to me, and she turns around and she goes, I own the dealership. And I said, okay, great. Let me ask you a couple of questions. I said, do you do anything with DEI? Do you pay attention to any of that crap that comes from the Harley-Davidson corporate office? And she says, she laughed and she says, no, we don't do any of that crap here. She said, I own this dealership. I run it. Period. End of sentence. And I said, okay, great. Now show me your sales. And so, we ended up doing a little shopping there. But that's what you have to do, right? As a consumer, you need to be the one that's holding these companies accountable. And by the way, tomorrow on the broadcast, we're going to talk about how big of a portion of the economy the media takes up in Wyoming. It's bigger than you think, and it might give you some perspective. So that's going to be part of what we're going to talk about tomorrow on the program. How big is the media economy in the state of Wyoming, and it's actually pretty big. So that's on tomorrow's program. So it's June, and we all know that we're all going to be inundated with stupid pride flags and ridiculousness. And actually, you know what? I just looked at my stack of stuff. I want to go here first. We need a good laugh after all that serious stuff, public lands and all that. So Jill Biden now says that had Joe Biden stayed in the election, that he would have beaten President Trump. I mean, an astounding claim, especially after a debate performance. And let me just see if I can get one of our sound bites here from that debate. But, we all watched the debate where Biden was just at best off of his rocker, where he really didn't have any idea of what was happening. Let's see here. Where is it? Yeah. Oh, man, I've got a lot of gaffes in here. Hold on just a second. Here we go. So here's just one section from the debate. And, and you could just tell that he doesn't know what he's talking about. This is when he and Trump were talking about golf.
And I do it. He doesn't do it. He can't hit a ball 50 yards. He challenged me to a golf match. He can't hit a ball 50 yards. I think I'm in very good shape. I feel that I'm as in good a shape as I was 25, 30 years ago. Actually, I'm probably a little bit lighter, but I'm in as good a shape as I was years ago. I feel very good. I feel the same. But I was willing to take a cognitive test. And you know what? If I didn't do well, I aced him. Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who's a great guy when he was White House doctor. And then I took another one, a similar one. And one of them said they've never seen anybody ace him.
Thank you. President Biden?
You can see he is 6'5" and only 223 pounds, or 235 pounds. Well, you said 6'4", 200. Well, anyway, that's what anyway, just take a look at what he says he is and take a look at what he is. Look, I'd be happy to have a driving contest with him. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6.
Yeah, right.
But by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf with you if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie, that he's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I have,
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
Okay, President Trump, we're going to...
Let's not. All right. So, I mean, you can just tell, even from that one, I mean, it's funny. Yeah. I mean, there's no way Joe Biden is a 6 handicap. But, through the whole debate, we all watched it. Even the media admits that they had no idea. Well, they don't admit. They claim they had no idea he was that bad off. Man, that was terrible. Well, so that was the whole thing. And, earlier this week, actually, I think it was late last week, I played you the sound bites of Jill Biden hawking her new book. I thought he may have had a stroke. Well, now Jill Biden is saying that she thinks that Biden would have won the election against Trump. Just absolutely crazy. Watch this. Don't know what's going on here. Okay, hold on. We'll try it again. But it's absolutely incredible that people like Jill Biden would claim that, oh, yeah, Trump, he would have beaten President Trump.
There were a lot of Democrats even who watched that debate performance.
Still, man, I don't know what's going on with the bandwidth here, but it is just killing me this morning. Let's just try this one more time, and hopefully, I mean, it's a great piece. Okay, so now I don't know what's going on, but anyway, so she claims that that Joe Biden would have beaten Donald Trump in the election. We're gonna try this one more time, and if not, we'll move on.
There were a lot of Democrats even who watched that debate performance and thought in some ways they'd been duped, that close advisors to President Biden, perhaps some members of the media, even had protected him enough and kept him out of maybe a rigorous event schedule enough that they could get him along through to Election Day. And they thought, oh, we just saw what he's really like behind the scenes. Is there any truth to that?
Really? If we were hiding him behind the scenes, why did we ask the Trump team for the debate? I mean, we were the ones that proposed it. Like, if that were true, you know, why did we put him out there?
So you don't think that he was protected in any way?
I don't think he was protected.
There's another sort of conventional wisdom has formed now in many Democratic circles that President Biden beats Donald Trump in 2020, a moment for history, according to Democrats, for sure, to stop the Trump administration.
Right.
They've overperformed in the midterms in 2022, and perhaps that would have been a good moment for President Biden to say, I've done the job. I'm going to be a one-term president at this stage in my life. Were there ever any conversations to that effect?
Well, of course. I mean, Joe had to decide whether to run again. But like you said, you know, we did well. The Democrats did well in the midterms. And in 2023, the Democratic Party was totally behind Joe. And people everywhere I went, Joe's got to do it again. He's got to run. He's got to run. And he was like, well, I don't know. You know, am I too old? I mean, it was the age question no matter where we went. And so, of course, you know, we heard that what people were saying, but then people were doing polling, you know, who could beat Trump. And the only person who polled that said they could beat Trump was Joe Biden. And so that's why Joe decided to continue on.
Or does the president now regret dropping out of the race?
You know, I would never want anyone I loved to go through that again. It was so painful.
Anyone that I loved to go through that. We all watched Joe Biden in office. We all saw how he was led around the White House lawn by the Easter Bunny. All of us saw that. And for Jill Biden to claim, well, I wouldn't want anybody that I love to go through that again. I think if she actually loved him, if anybody did in his family, they would have said, hey, Joe, it's time to hang it up. We're not going to go through this anymore. But they didn't do that. And it's absolutely preposterous for her to claim that he would have beaten Donald Trump. I mean, Trump beat Kamala Harris, I think it was like 320 electoral votes to around 170. I mean, it was absolutely astounding, the beating that Trump put on the Democrats. And if you remember, all of the polling through the whole thing was, they're dead even. It's Kamala Harris surging. And I remember the media, when it was happening. And all of them were suggesting, oh, no, Kamala Harris is going to win. Kamala Harris. They couldn't have been doing any polling because if they had, they would have known they were going to lose their tail end. But they didn't, obviously, they didn't do that. So anyway, I mean, you really can't trust anything the media says. And the best thing that you can do is just to get your information from multiple sources. Listen to Cowboy State Politics. And if you really want to subject yourself to a bunch of misery, read the Cowboy, and just make sure that you're making up your own mind, and you're not making up. Somebody else isn't making up your mind for you. So it's June, and all of us are going to be subjected to pride flags all over the place, as if any of us really want to know what actually happens in somebody else's bedroom. It's not on my list, but apparently people in Rock Springs and nationally, they think that we have to have a Pride Month, which is stupid. I don't see why government needs to be involved in what you do sexually. But Trump's Department of Education is doing something different. In fact, they have replaced Pride Month with Title IX month. Title IX, of course, is the law that guarantees that there is equivalent women's sports to men's sports. And this was a big thing, even in Wyoming, when Title IX, getting that thing passed, helping get that passed, was a big deal. That was a big moment in education where women actually had athletics that they can compete in. But now we're living in a place where those same people. The same party is saying, well, no, men need to participate in women's sports. How incredibly insulting is that? That now, you're not even authentic women. We have to have men competing in women's sports. And then it's just, it is absolutely destructive to the whole idea of Title IX. And so the Department of Education has decided that they are going to call it Title IX month and not Pride Month, and they put out a little video. I recorded this one off of X this morning, if we can get it to play. Here we go. Maybe, maybe not.
My administration will not stand by and watch men beat and batter female athletes. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
Title IX.
Title IX. Title IX.
Title IX.
I think the Trump administration gave the University of Pennsylvania a dose of reality.
Grateful for the Trump administration being so hard on this issue and holding them accountable.
Together again, united, we are saying that women and girls sports matter.
Title IX, I think, is very clear about the position, not only of the administration, but of where women athletes are and what they fought hard for, to be given the opportunity to compete fairly.
We're putting every school receiving taxpayer dollars on notice that if you let men take over women's sports teams or invade your locker rooms, you will be investigated for violations of Title IX and risk your federal funding. There will be no federal funding.
I think it's a great idea. I have been so frustrated with. I mean, since the whole idea of this stupid Pride Month came up. I mean, it's. I think it's an affront to our country, and I think it's an affront to women. You know, the very suggestion that men ought to be allowed to play in women's sports is absolutely insane. Men can play in sports, men's sports. And the reason why some of these men want to play in women's sports is they're losers because they're no good playing in a men's sport. And, you know, look at that swimmer from, what was it, the University of Pennsylvania or whatever. When he was competing against men, he was ranked like 230th or something. And then he masquerades as a woman, and then magically he's winning races. I mean, it's because men are faster, men are stronger. And we shouldn't, you know, in the boxing match during the Olympics, that was an outrage. You know, any other group of people, we would say, hey, you know, maybe we shouldn't let men beat up on women. But that's what happened. That's what happened in the Olympics, and we shouldn't do that. All right, my friends, that'll pretty much do it for today's edition of the broadcast. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the media in Wyoming. How much of the Wyoming economy does the media actually take up? And it's bigger than you think. It's going to be kind of surprising. And so we'll do that tomorrow. Also, we're going to talk to Zita Anderson from Crook County. Be a great conversation. I really like her. She's running for the Wyoming House of Representatives. So we'll do all that tomorrow. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. See you tomorrow, my friends. Have a good afternoon.